Hi and welcome. My name is Lawrence Baker. This video is going to be about smart objects inside of Photoshop. I'm using Photoshop CC 2015.5. It's currently August 2016. We need to be definitive about what a smart object actually is. I explain it like this. It's a layer within your document that allows you to non-destructively transform that layer without losing the integrity of the original image data. It really comes into its own with pixel-based raster images like JPEGs, TIFFs and PNGs. When you turn them into smart objects, they will become transformable as non-destructible vector shapes in Photoshop. That sounds complicated, but I'll explain more in a minute. Just try and remember that transform is the operative word. And as far as Photoshop goes, edit, transform, scale, rotate, skew, distort, change perspective, warp, rotate or flip. They are the transformation or transform tools inside of Photoshop. So when you turn a pixel-based layer into a smart object, you cannot do any pixel edits on it because it now becomes a vector shape, and you can non-destructively or infinitely edit that layer and change the size, etc., without losing the original integrity of the image. I'm going to show you that in more detail in a minute. So let's show you the different flavors of smart objects. Well, if you create a smart object from a raw file, so if I place embedded and find a raw file, place it in, it's going to invoke Adobe Camera Raw. Go OK, brings it in as a smart object. That's one layer in. You've got the bounding box, you have to accept it by pressing the tick symbol or pressing return. It doesn't matter to me whether it's linked or embedded. These are workflow options because the smart object will always behave the same inside the document. So let's place link now. I'm going to pick a bit of text from Illustrator, so it's a vector file. Place. OK. Next one and the final one. Again, I'm going to place embedded. I'm not bothered about linking or embedding. I'm going to put in a PDF file, because you can do that. So in comes the PDF as a smart object. So once I press return, I've got three smart objects. These are what I call external file smart objects. They're an Adobe Acrobat Pro, a PDF file, one Adobe Illustrator file, a vector file, and one Adobe Camera Raw file. So it doesn't really matter otherwise if they're linked or embedded. The way I look at linking is, if you're working in a team, there might be a good reason why you would link to one file. Let's say you had a client who wanted to change the logo and all of you are working on different versions, let's say, are doing different things with that master file, though it's not called master, I'm only using that to illustrate an example. You can then just change the color, let's say, of the master one, and all the smart objects that are linked to it will actually update. So I'm not going to go too much into linking and embedding because they are really workflow options, and I'm going to cover that in another video. I just want to go through the behavior of smart objects. Now, obviously now, with the properties panel showing, if I go to edit contents or double click, it will bring up Adobe Acrobat Pro. So you've got to have it on your system in the first place. So back to Photoshop. So if I double click on this one, it will bring up Adobe Illustrator. Again, of course, I could have gone to the properties and go edit contents. I can also change the status from embed to linked, etc. It's good to have the properties panel open when you're doing this. Obviously, I can also go edit contents on the raw file and it'll bring up Adobe Camera Raw. But the real power for me for smart objects is the fact you can turn a pixel-based layer into a smart object layer. Before I actually get rid of that Illustrator one, just show you one thing quickly. Under edit and transform, you can't do distort, perspective or warp inside of Photoshop. You have to do that type of thing inside of Illustrator, and it makes total sense, of course. I think the same would apply to the PDF file. Let's have a look at that as well. Edit, transform. Again, you can't do that. You'll have to do that inside of Acrobat. Let's lose those files now. I'm going to delete them by backspacing on all three of them. For me, the real power of smart objects is when you turn a pixel-based layer into a smart object. And I'm going to show you that power right away by going to the Move tool now, by either pressing V on my keyboard or coming up here. With the Alt or Option key pressed, I'm going to drag across and create another version of this flower symbol on another layer. I'm going to turn the copy into a smart object by converting to smart object. I could have come up to the panel menu here and gone convert to smart object. I could have come up to the layer menu, smart objects, convert to smart object. But right clicking here is the quickest way in my opinion. So I've got two instances of the same image on two different layers. I'm going to shift click on the bottom layer, go to edit, transform, scale, and make these really small. Keeping the shift key pressed because that will keep the aspect ratio of the original images. Press return or hit the tick symbol. Command T or Control T, the keyboard shortcut for free transform. So I'm just going to press the shift key again, bring them back up to their, well, even bigger than they were before. Press return or hit the tick symbol. You can see the non-smart object layer looks awful because what's happened is I've thrown away the pixels for good when I made it smaller, and I cannot bring them back. With the smart object layer, it's this vector shape concept. It said, well, I'll keep the pixels for you if you're going to make it smaller or larger again. So that's really what's happening. Interpolation is taking place, and interpolation is how Photoshop decides to infill or throw away pixels when it does a scaling, for instance. But if you do any transform, you are degrading the image. If it's a smart object, you'll be absolutely fine. Now, obviously, if I click on this layer now and go to edit, transform, let's say warp, and warp it. Now, I'm still keeping the integrity of the pixels. What I'm saying is if I accept it, I might not be able to get back to where I was before, but the basic overriding principle is I've not destroyed that image in any way, not the integrity. Now, if you do that with a non-smart object layer, you're always having an effect on the pixels. But with this method, you're not. You're keeping the integrity of the original data. So if I try to get it back, let's say by going edit, transform, warp, I might be able to get it back. In fact, if I play around a lot and try and keep everything straight, I probably would get there. That's not too bad. In fact, probably move it across that way a little bit. Yeah, maybe that way. Yeah, well, you get the idea, guys. I can get it back, but I haven't lost any integrity to that data. So if I press return, I'll accept that. That's fine. If I try to paint on this layer now, this is the concept I'm trying to get across to you. If I come here and try to paint on it, it's going to prompt me and said, the smart object must be rasterized. So that's the clue. It's a vector shape, really. That's what it is as far as Photoshop is concerned. So it must be rasterized before proceeding. Edit contents will no longer be available. Rasterize the smart object ? I'm going to go cancel on that. So you get the idea, guys. Now, if I want to edit this with a pixel-based edit, I have to either go edit contents or double click on the thumbnail. Double clicking on the thumbnail will bring up another document tab with the file format .psb. That's for the large file format for Photoshop. Don't get too involved with that because that will always happen when you do this. The important thing to remember is you've created a new document. Now, this can be very confusing the first time you use smart objects. You think, where's my image gone? What's gone on? What it's allowing you to do is treat the smart object as a separate image, and you can put layers on it, etc. In fact, I'm going to do that now. Put a new layer on top. And I could paint in that layer. Now I can make my pixel edit now. I've just painted black across it. Now I have to go and close the image down, Command W, save it. Then I'm back to the original document. So this is what really throws people when they first use smart objects. When they go to edit it, they say, where's my image gone? Now, with Adobe Camera Raw or vector files or PDF files, you'll go to the native program, Illustrator, Adobe Acrobat Pro, etc. So that's the important thing to remember. When you're working with these pixel-based smart objects, you're going to create a new document tab when you go to edit contents or double click on the thumbnail. So I'm going to lose that layer now because I don't like it, or just turn it off. So you can create a whole new image inside of here. It's an embedded smart object, and do all sorts of things here and actually turn it on and off, then go back, Command or Control W, save, and go back to the original image. So do remember that it does throw you. As I said, if you attempt to paint on it, you'll be prompted to rasterize it. I don't recommend rasterizing it. Double click or click on edit contents with the properties panel open. I have mine floating at all times. That's the way I work. Then you can go back and make as many changes as you want without affecting or rasterizing the smart object. Right, the other thing you can do with smart objects, which is really fundamental to the usefulness of them, is you can actually go to places like image, adjust, and put on shadows and highlights. Now, of course, you could put an adjustment layer on, but you are limited. You cannot use shadows, highlights on this image. Well, if you use it on a normal layer, you're destructively changing the image. With the smart object layer, you've got the ability, I'm going to click on it now, to change it. So I'm just going to play around slightly and just go accept it, go okay like that. You'll notice I've got a layer mask and I've got shadow highlights written there. I can turn it on and off if I wanted to. Double clicking on it, I can still play around with shadow highlights and play around with all sorts of things and do all sorts of things with it. Go okay. It's a non-destructive filter, basically. Now, if you don't have a smart object, you cannot have a smart filter. That's what a smart filter is. It only works on smart objects. People get confused between smart objects and smart filters. They are one and the same thing in many ways, because you cannot have a smart filter without first having a smart object. Very important to understand. You only get one layer mask. Also, you can put filters on. Now, I've used All Paint previously. I'm going to use it again quickly. And just go okay. Now you can see the All Paint filter there. I've got two filters on now. I can double click on All Paint and do what I like to it and change it at any time I want, etc, etc. Play around with the bristle detail, whatever. But I've only got one layer mask. Of course, I can paint out the filter by using the brush tool actually on the layer mask with black, let's say, and paint it out and see parts of the image that have not been affected by the filters. So I can Command Z on that because I don't want to do that. I can also double click here and play around with the blend mode and opacity of each individual filter as well. So that's the real power of smart objects. The fact you can scale or transform these pixel based layers. Now with the Adobe Camera Raw, etc., it's pretty obvious how they're going to work. With these pixel based layers, this is the real power of smart objects. You can warp, etc., transform. You can also add smart filters to smart objects. You can't have a smart filter without a smart object. And don't forget, when you double click here or go to edit contents and properties, you will see a separate document tab where you can make your changes and treat it as a separate image. Go Command W and go back and save it and go back to the original image. These are the things that really throw people when they first use smart objects. Why wouldn't you use a smart object on a pixel based layer? You're not creating any harm. So straight away, when I bring something in that is pixel based, I change it into a smart object. It makes total sense. That's it, guys. I hope you got something from this. One little heads up, I'll make sure your properties panel is showing because it does help you. I'll cover linking and embedding in a little bit more detail in another video, because linking's got a few little caveats you should understand, but basically it's a workflow thing. It doesn't really change the way smart objects work. Smart objects work fundamentally the same whether they're linked or embedded. That's it, guys. Thanks very much.